few are coming in. So Service Fabric on Azure Stack. I don't have any particular updates. Jocko would be the one to speak to that. He has the best status, and he's not here right now. But it's still something we're working on. I don't know, just to recap, we rely on VM scale sets, and in the initial release of Azure Stack, VM scale sets didn't exist, so we have to wait for that to show up. In the meantime, it is possible today, if you are really trying to make this work, you can use individual IaaS VMs on Azure Stack and deploy a Service Fabric standalone environment so that you get the VM management and the VMs are handed out individually through Azure Stack, and then you deploy Service Fabric on top of it. Until some of these other primitives show up, there won't be Service Fabric on top, and we're kind of seeing whether or not that will be, whether or not we end up having like a Service Fabric resource provider that ships there, or whether or not we're going to wait and ship the clusterless, serverless version of Service Fabric on-prem kind of instead of having to make you do all the infrastructure stuff. I know that that's in discussion. I don't know if it's landed yet, but that's an option. So for now, go with individual IaaS VMs and deploy Service Fabric standalone on those. That's going to be a supported thing. That'll work today. And then we'll figure out kind of down the road what the standalone story, what the Service Fabric on Stack story looks like. You might see the serverless version of Service Fabric and not the resource provider option that you see today. So that's that one.
I think there was a question before that Mark actually posted.
That one was left over from this afternoon, I thought.
Yeah, you can read through it though, Mikael, if you want to.
I just need to find it here. So how does service affinity constraints work in partition stateful service? Each replica/partition is positioned together on the same node? Question mark. The final thing to notice about affinity is that affinity relationships aren't supported with.
That's my answer, actually.
Oh, that's actually
the doc.
Okay.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah. So there's a doc there that describes how affinity works. The thing is that partitioning only works, affinity only works with partitioning for the child service. So we have this parent-child notion. The parent cannot be partitioned today. So if you're going with a partitioned service as the child, you get there's two different options, and you get the behavior depending upon what mode you picked. So that's pretty much it. There's aligned and unaligned, basically. But that's it.
Okay.
I think there was Linux reverse proxy.
Any chance we reverse proxy Linux? Yes, you will. Definitely.
And then the last part that you missed out is soon.
Soon, actually, yeah. It will be available fairly soon, at least in preview form. Just a few things we gotta finish up to make that available. So that is the new and improved one. So that's reverse proxy as you know it today. That'll be available on Linux. There's also some more cool stuff we're doing to kind of enhance that whole communication thing. That'll be coming up pretty soon too. So, but first and foremost, reverse proxy on Linux. Yeah, that is coming pretty soon.
Cool. Next question. Is it possible to add application insights to an existing VM scale set for Service Fabric? Yeah, as far as I know, App Insights is just another, App Insights...
It depends on what you want to use it for.
Yeah, it's a little interesting also to say App Insights for a VM scale set.
So the thing that you can do, on VM scale set, you have, on the Windows version, you have what you call the Windows Azure Diagnostics Agent. You can configure that to forward whatever it picks up from the node to application insights. And in the Service Fabric setup, I think when you create a cluster through the portal, you're asked for an application insights key. And what we do with that is we configure the WAT client or agent, on the nodes to forward the ETW channels that we have into App Insights, so you can do your log querying there. So if you don't do it when you create the cluster, basically you have to update the WAT configuration of the cluster in the VM scale set model to have it forward these logs into application insights. So that can definitely be done.
Yep. But at that point, you're just reconfiguring the WAT agent on the machines. It's not really a Service Fabric level things. You need to find the WAD configuration and change it there.
Yep, correctly.
Yeah, but that should be doable. That's just any other update.
Any official docs on how to do that? Yeah, let me find one. I'll post it.
Let's see. So the next one was from Sean. Microsoft has confirmed disabling TLS1 will break communication between Service Fabric Resource Provider and the cluster. Do we have plans on the roadmap to update the TLS1 too?
Good question.
I think I saw that on the issues list the other day, but I don't know an update for when that's going to get fixed.
Yeah, I'm not sure either.
It's also surprising to me that that's broken, but
Break communication between the RP and the cluster.
yeah, because it's querying over HTTP.
But between the RP and the cluster, I mean, that's our problem.
Yeah, that's totally our fault.
Yeah. I mean, of course, we're gonna get that fixed up somehow. I don't know if that's terribly relevant to you.
Well, it's just that
You
when
guys
they when they try to lock it down, because disabling TLS10 is like a security measure these days.
Yeah.
So when people go and do that, all of a sudden the RP can't talk to the cluster anymore.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, that's just our fault.
Yeah.
Security guy. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's something we're going to look into.
No, I mean this is gonna. Yeah, I think that this is already in the works. It would surprise you.
It would be crazy if it wasn't.
Yeah. So, we don't have unfortunately, we here do not have a time frame for you, but that's got to be something that we do.
Yeah.
I know we already started to do that work. There's a whole bunch of other. We go through these reviews every so often, and this was one of the later ones that showed up as invalid and is going to start getting disabled by default. But we haven't taken all those changes in yet. There were some crypto suites we had to deal with first. Anyway, sorry about that.
Memory issues?
Yes.
Memory issues. All right. This doesn't ring a bell, but if you're seeing this in a production environment, can you please open a support ticket? Because I think we're going to want access to some log data and possibly crash dumps to look at. I'm going to have a hard time diagnosing that just by what you said here. Doesn't ring a bell off the top of my head. Seems weird though.
I got a support request open, but it's just back and forth trying to say that, like, is it something that a support, like a service, is it a service fabric issue that they can actually investigate?
Well, judging by what you said from the memory dump, those are our things that are apparently being stuffed into Gen 2 and taking up space. So possibly.
Yeah.
It's worth looking into. If you were, if these were your types, then I would say no. But these are our types.
Okay.
Hey, Nick, can you give us can you either IM us or give us a support case number that you have open?
Yeah, just email it to Mark or one of us.
Yep.
And then my other question was, what were the data structures that you were using? Like, was it reliable queue, reliable concurrent queue, reliable dictionary, or some combination?
Just dictionary.
Just dictionary?
You're just storing offsets, so just a number.
Yeah.
I do this a
Yeah,
lot.
I do a lot too. Yeah. Do you? So you say it every now and then it'll explode in size. Do you know if there's a change in traffic patterns that you're getting from Event Hub? Like, or is that during high peak times?
It seemed pretty constant. Like, there wasn't any particular spike.
Does it just sort of happen periodically?
Yeah, like every few weeks, like they'll just be hovering, and then one of the petitions will just spiral out of control until that node basically goes offline, and then it kills the processes and starts them back up again.
Well, failover works. So that's good.
No, that's why.
Yeah. No, that's a weird one. I would say send us the ticket number and we'll take a look. I haven't seen anything like this.
I haven't either. At least not with log records and.
No, I've seen things where cleanup of our log records would linger for a period of time because we hadn't done the compaction in the log. Like it hadn't gotten trimmed.
Yeah.
And so the old versions of things would build up.
Hey, well, okay. So is it the same key? You're updating the same key for that Event Hub offset?
Yeah.
If you're updating the same key, there was something there. If you're updating the same key,
Because it's versioned under the hood, right?
Right.
And so we're keeping all the old versions until
Right.
the old ones can be trimmed,
right, and then it's not getting compacted.
and then it's not getting
You
compacted.
remember something like that.
But I haven't
But I'm
seen
not
one of
sure.
those in a
That was a
while.
while back.
Yeah.
Okay, we'll
Yeah.
we'll look into the support ticket for that one.
Sounds fun indeed. Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah. And you can't replicate it locally. Yeah, of course you can't.
Yeah, of course it doesn't repro locally. Yeah.
I mean, that's
No.
just
Only the best bugs don't repro locally.
exactly.
Okay, Marcin has decided to wade into the fray. This one's you.
Okay, Service Mesh Envoy. Which approach do you plan? Sidecar or proximity? You're always ahead of us, Marcin.
Plan? You lost.
So yeah. So this will be a lot of this is still kind of design phase. There will essentially be two parts that matter to you in the service mesh. By the way, this was the much better part of the reverse proxy I alluded to earlier. I don't want to mention too much because it's still kind of in design phase, but that's okay. The two parts you really care about are ingress. So we'll have a way that allows you to configure fairly easily layer 7 traffic routing into your applications. So rather than, for example, using the reverse proxy to expose everything, which you don't want to do, you'll be able to, selectively pick which service to expose and how you want to route traffic to. So that's one part. And the second part is kind of the full-on mesh, which is service-to-service communication being handled by proxies on your behalf, so your service code doesn't know or care or have to think about how to do service resolution or discovery or anything like that. So in order to enable that, what you'll see is a proxy has a sidecar that sits next to each one of your code packages, effectively, or each one of your containers, and the sidecar intercepts traffic and does routing and service lookup for you. So it would be a sidecar pattern rather than per node. Reverse proxy is what you have per node today. So that's the difference. More on that as it develops. More to live.
There was some additional feedback or additional questions going around about server GC versus desktop GC.
Oh, that's a fun one.
I know you and I have talked about this, so why don't we share it with the crowd?
Okay, so
What do these different GC modes really do?
This was a weird thing that this is a strange way they named these things. So when they named it server GC, it was years back at a time when the expectation was that on each one of your servers you'd only have one thing running.
An Exchange server, a file server,
exactly,
a web server,
or something like that. So the idea was that if I only have one thing running on that machine, I should be able to use multiple threads to do garbage collection to be more efficient, which is true, and that's a good thing. In our environment, a Service Fabric environment, where I might have dozens or hundreds of things running on the same machine, now it's
different processes.
It could potentially be a bad idea because if one of those processes is constantly doing garbage collection, it can actually thread starve all of the other processes, which is a bad thing. So it's unfortunately named client and server GC, but the client one basically means that basically on a client machine, since I have multiple applications running,
it's expecting multi-tenancy.
Yeah, it's expecting multi-tenancy. I don't want my Skype application, which is constantly garbage collecting, to starve all my other things like Slack or Teams or whatever else. They should share environment. So in a shared environment, it's really a client that you want. So it's really shared versus not shared.
So if you're running like one process, one workload,
You have one application.
Yeah,
Then server GC might make more sense.
might work better. If you're running multiple processes, multiple types of services, multiple instances of services, all of that stuff on your machine, then actually the desktop or client GC might end up working better for you.
Yeah.
At this point, I just leave. At this point, I've personally been leaving it at desktop, unless I have a reason to switch it to server.
The default for Service Fabric now, or at least ASP.NET Core, defaulted to the server one. It didn't used to, but maybe that's an ASP.NET.
Oh, interesting.
That might be ASP.NET that does that.
Yeah.
Yeah. You mean in the project templates and
Yeah.
Yeah. I think because it's probably in their case they're thinking, well, here's your web app, you host it on a server, you got they're probably looking at it as a server model, whereas we're looking at it as a shared multi-tenant model.
Yeah.
So it
play with
sorry about this. This is a shitty answer, but like it depends on what your workload is doing.
Yeah.
Which is something I found out. But
Yeah. Oh, one thing you also might check, which just occurred to me, check the large object heap. I know you said Gen 2, but just in case there's a bunch of crap sitting in LOH as well.
It was pretty stable.
Yeah, I'd be
Yeah.
surprised if it was larger.
Yeah, okay, we'll look that one. We'll look up the incident number when you get it to us, but
Thank you.
that's the state of GC.
Mm.
Question was, at a high level, what architecture does Service Fabric on Linux assume? Linux on bare metal, Linux on Hyper-V, or Linux on VMware? Okay, so Service Fabric doesn't know. It doesn't care. It doesn't know where the OS is coming from, so it doesn't assume anything. We just know that there's an operating system and some networking, and we go from there. So there's no, and that's true of Windows or Linux. There's no real presumption or any sort of behavior that we do differently, whether or not we're in those environments. You might have to build the clusters differently. You might have to configure the machines differently, but Service Fabric doesn't know. So that's part of why we can run in all these different environments, is we didn't presume that it was going to be physical hardware or this particular hypervisor or whatever. So the answer is we don't. There is no default. We don't know.
Is that it?
Issue,
That's it?
email
Oh, there you
address,
go. There you go.
GCGC.
Quantum network.
Okay, cool.
Neighboring side, neighboring for hybrid spheres.
Flannel's in-
Overlay. Oh, I see. What options do you have for overlay container networking of services, and what short and long-term options may we have? Where's our container guy?
This one we should have.
So, there's been a couple different things that we're working on in this regard. One is just the open networking, which is, I think, the equivalent of basically what you have today. We've also been working to make sure that containers can get stable IPs that will follow them around in the cluster. That helps if you're bringing software that isn't used to dynamic addressing, isn't used to FQDNs or DNS names. It's just expecting, I'm going to be on 192.168.01, he's going to be on 2, he's going to be on 3, and that's how things are going to communicate. The other thing that we've been doing in terms of an overlay network is allowing a kind of private VNet to be created within the cluster per Service Fabric application instance, so that you can, these are kind of for SASE solutions where you've made your application with your 5 services in it, and you want to be able to stamp out instances of that in the cluster and have them isolated so that they can't talk to the other instances. There's going to be both networks that exist solely within the cluster that are isolated per that application instance, and then we're also going to work to bring virtual networks that exist kind of from outside the cluster. Say it's a virtual network defined as a resource in Azure, right? And that virtual network wraps around some other VMs or a SQL database or something like that. So you'd be able to have that as a resource that exists in Azure, providing that security boundary, and then you'd be able to attach it to this application instance. And then as the services inside the application kind of move around from node to node, they retain that networking security boundary. So those are kind of some of the things that are coming. That's separate from kind of the message routing, reverse proxy, ingress type stuff that Boss was talking about.
Lower level stuff.
Right.
Yeah.
These are really networking concepts.
I was mainly talking about layer 7
Right.
routing, mostly HTTP traffic.
Yeah, and this is more like IP level.
Yeah, this
stuff.
IP level stuff.
For the most part.
Which we'll make use of actually in the proxies. Because
Oh, yeah.
proxies have to be able to do this stuff to intercept traffic.
But I guess if this question is more about how you can set this up for the Linux on-prem, is that the scenario?
Didn't see that yet. I mean,
So,
if he's talking about Flannel, and Flannel is a networking provider from CoreOS, now Red Hat, for Kubernetes, and it does some of these same concepts.
Yeah, so I don't think the first iteration of the networking stuff we do in Service Fabric is tied to Azure.
No. There's certainly going to be just little virtual networks that exist that you can assign to these application instances that are not related in any way to Azure. And as far as I know, don't depend on any functionality in Azure. So those could exist standalone. here's the guy who can confirm this, but
There we go.
isolated networks per app on-prem, yes.
And the next one, which we'll get to, is also for you.
Isolated networks will be available on-prem.
Yes.
Yes,
Right.
will be available, but
The question was, we're gonna have ones that are resources in Azure, but then naturally you'd be able to define a little VNet kind of per app
Yeah.
somewhere else as well.
and initially, many of these things will be available in Azure first, and then will be rolled out
Later on,
on-prem.
Yeah.
So
As we figure out how to make them work without all of the nice
without all of
infrastructure
the,
we have.
exactly.
Yeah, there you go.
IPs, you need to get IPs.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the next question is actually also, Manny, fantastic timing.
Did a great
Really,
time. I was
seriously.
just told him.
Good work.
Yes.
You're welcome.
So,
Linux containers on 1709 Windows.
yeah, we're here.
We are right down here.
Okay, so so Service Fabric, this might have been asked, but ETN on Service Fabric Linux Docker container support. So Service Fabric already on Linux does already support Docker containers. So
Yeah.
and it also supports Docker volume drivers. So on Linux,
Yeah, go for it.
on Windows, the issue is Service Fabric does support Windows Docker containers as well as Docker volume, but on Windows we don't have too many volume drivers that are available. So we are actually working on a few. Answered already.
And Docker, no, I mean, just Docker itself on Windows, the volume driver and logging driver situation is a little hand wavy yet.
Yeah.
So support for that is still coming to Windows from the Docker and Windows side of the family.
And so we are actually working on a few Docker volume drivers for Windows as well. Like it's for Azure, but it'll work on both Windows and Linux, like a managed disk volume driver and Azure Files volume driver, and of course our super performant, Service Fabric volume driver as well. Then, for example, running Linux containers on 1709 Windows. Well, Windows hasn't made that GA yet. It's still a preview, and so after Windows GA is when we can actually look at it. But our guidance currently is just run Linux on Linux Service Fabric clusters and Windows on Windows Service Fabric clusters. So, and so many. Okay, current preview has limited Compose support. Yeah, so we are working on GAing Compose support. So over the next couple of months, the next release should actually GA Docker Compose.
Yeah, and I think on our site, we did also have a list of what compose tags we support today.
Yeah.
Maybe somebody can find that and send it in there, but I tried. I am now talking and I can only do one thing at a time. But I know that we do have that doc that says which compose tags exist yet, but yes, hopefully that should just be G.
Yeah.
Okay.
This one I think is
Can you guys hurry up and release Bart Smith's Reactor as a programming model on Salesforce Fabric?
Man, I wish.
I know. Any thoughts or hints about new programming models? I'm sure. Okay. Since you asked. So we've been spending a lot of time trying to figure out how we can simplify a lot of the work we have that you have to do to define services and applications. So we're actually working on a model that will hopefully make that a lot simpler, and then also make it easier for us then to introduce new programming models on top of it. So Reactor, we haven't specifically been looking at Reactor, but that would be one example of something that then we could bring on board as we do this work. So I don't want to share too many details because it's still kind of in flux and we're sort of in a design phase, so I don't want to make any promises we can't keep, but I think fairly soon we'll have something to show. So
But like an example would be something like ASP.NET is already a fairly well, thought out, mature programming model. What would it be like in order to use a programming model like that and kind of mix in the Service Fabric concepts that are interesting,
exactly,
rather than having to start as a Service Fabric service from day one and have all that stuff.
That's sort of the thinking around it, right?
As an example.
So yeah, okay. So expanding on that example, if you want to do ASP.NET Core on Service Fabric today, you have a couple options. One is you bring it in as a guest executable or container and you just roll with it like that. But then the more common one is you write a reliable service, you inherit the stateful service or stateless service base class. So that's kind of your base. that immediately ties you into Service Fabric, and then you use that to bootstrap ASP.NET Core on top of it. So the thinking today is that we would sort of reverse that. So you would just write an ASP.NET Core application like you normally would, and then you would pull in the Service Fabric dependencies to kind of enhance it. So that's the general thinking. That's kind of the general direction we're going. And hopefully that'll help us light up some additional programming models on top. So just something to chew on for the time being, but we'll have more at a later time. And I know you wanted Reactor specifically because Reactor is pretty cool.
Yeah, for those who might not be so familiar with weird code names for Microsoft internal goop, Reactor is the core of Cortana, and it's a function data flowing reactive extension kind of thing.
Actually, I like that. That's a really cool name.
Yes,
I like Reactor.
Someday we'll learn how to name things.
Some people like our descriptive naming.
Yes.
The Yammer group.
Let's see. For example, I'd like to use open source Linux Docker containers
That's
for
a follow-up
Elasticsearch.
descriptive.
Oh, I see.
Yeah,
I
so
see.
the next question
Yeah,
is
so today you got to just
ETA
run it up on Linux clusters.
Yes.
I see. Yeah.
yes, ETA.
Yeah.
ETA for other programming languages such as Go. Go?
All right. So
Back to
since
what
you
were
asked.
saying.
So what I talked about with the direction we're taking with program models, again, that's another thing that we want to kind of enable, make it feel more natural. So today you can do Go or any other language as a guest executable, but it sort of feels a little, I don't want to say second class, but it's not very tightly integrated. So that's another one of our goals with the kind of overall simplification direction we want to take, is that it should feel more natural to write applications in other languages, because basically the hooks into the platform will be more language agnostic. Today it's all C# or all Java, and trying to hook in a different language is a little awkward. So that's another thing that we're aiming to fix with this, to make it a little more natural.
Yeah. I mean,
So
and
hopefully
we've got good, the structure that we have in place is good already, where most of Service Fabric is native code,
Right.
but getting to that native code is hard.
exactly, yeah.
And nobody really wants to write, I don't know, their cluster management and deployment code in C++.
Yeah.
So how do we do language agnostic bindings
Yeah.
down to that native and still give you the programming models and the stuff that you have today?
So we did an exercise, with this as just kind of a little bit of prototyping work. The exercise we did was we took Node.js as our kind of lowest common denominator, which is if I can do it in JavaScript, I should probably be able to do it just about anywhere. So that's that's sort of that's our pie in the sky, right? That's what we're aiming for. It's all this stuff you should be able to do this even with JavaScript.
Strings are floats, longs are floats, floats are floats, floats are strings.
And one does not equal one.
Objects are prototypes. I have no idea anymore. I've lost my mind.
Up is down. Hamburgers eat people.
All right.
All right.
I had to
We don't have a lot of questions.
I had
so.
to post the link.
But there was a question on, can I deploy Linux containers to the Linux party cluster?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah. So yeah, that's a great way to get started. Party clusters, again, for anybody who doesn't know them, there's very good. No, Mikkel, that's a great link. But
Yes,
yeah,
thank you.
the party clusters. Could you put the party cluster link in there while you're being so helpful?
I'm your link guy today.
Yeah, you have a spare set of hands. The party clusters, for anybody who might not be aware of them, are a great way to get little time-limited Service Fabric clusters for free that you can play around with, deploy software to, whatever you want. We think those are a great resource for trying stuff out, like playing around with containers or getting a Linux environment set up and all that type of stuff. So make use of them. They're pretty great.
This is for you.
Marcin, not even a question, Edwin. Thanks me for using data packages. Yeah, data packages are a thing. You can use them. They're useful when you have kind of static information that you want to roll out that doesn't fit a config model. They're just another way of rolling out and discriminating between types of data. We see them used for things like static icon files, raw data files, things like that. But they're just another package that you can version and roll out independently, so they're pretty nice.
The main thing is that you can get static content out without having to restart the code.
Right.
Yeah.
That's the main thing.
That's right.
Yep.
And version it independently.
Right, which is also nice. So I don't have to touch code. I don't have to restart my process in order to, change my Favicon.
And you can do it in a safe rolling.
Right, where somehow that does screw anything up.
We safely upgrade your icon.
Yes.
You can safely upgrade your icon.
Other things as well, but, start with the basics.
All right. With persistence layers, what is the best hybrid approach to take allowing all nodes to share data? So your on-prem cluster is currently deployed in VMware virtual machines. Best approach to allowing all nodes to share data.
So what do you
Yeah, I
mean
mean,
by hybrid?
Well, so typically and Quinnan can correct us, but typically when what this means is you've gotten some data in memory, you persist it to the fast SSD drive. If you're super fancy, you move it to the local spinning Rust drive, and then you stage it out to some remote SAN or blob storage or something like that over the network. We typically don't see nodes sharing data. That looks more like a SAN or a remote file share or something like that. That's less common in Service Fabric's world. We don't really think much about those remote stores or any sort of shared information from node to node. You really want those things to be as independent as possible, so that they can move around, fail, exhibit different perf characteristics, all that good stuff without impacting anybody else or having a central point of failure. So it's not that you can't have another stage that's remote. It's just that typically having any sort of central place where that remote thing can fail and take out the shared storage for everybody simultaneously is typically bad. We see it be a point of failure, and we try to recommend people stay away from it or presuming that it's going to be there. So maybe as a perf improvement or maybe as a cost-saving measure, sure, but not where you'd want to store the hot or iterative state that your service really needs to run and operate. But yeah, it's just another form of distance. And usually what we say is, the further you get, you have to be very cognizant of speed, and you have to be very aware that at any point that network link could break down and you won't have that further colder storage. Let us know if we guessed what your question meant correctly. I think I got it, but
I think he's writing that response.
okay, we'll see
Okay.
when that one comes in.
So,
Andre really wants to take on the party clusters.
any built-in way to get the topology and resource details of a Service Fabric cluster? Say I like to query use memory. Okay, so if you look at Service Fabric Explorer, which shows you a lot of the topology, it'll show you, for example, if you look at the cluster map, it shows you what fault domain and upgrade domains the nodes fall into, and it shows you quite a bit of information about the nodes. Everything you see in there is all coming through the publicly documented HTTP API that Service Fabric provides.
Okay.
So you can open up Service Fabric Explorer with Fiddler on the side. You can see all the stuff coming through. And of course, everything that you can do over HTTP, you can also do with the SF clients, the C# clients and stuff. Now, what we don't have, though, is we don't have a way to get you information about the actual physical machine. So you won't be able to see what kind of CPUs they have or how much memory they have, unless you configured the cluster ahead of time, where you've put those as capacities on the nodes.
Yeah, we can do a little bit. I mean,
We can do a little bit of that.
There's
We
always
don't
going to
do it automatically.
right, and there's a difference between what Windows perf counters are going to tell you in terms of total consumption on the machine and what Service Fabric is going to tell you.
Yeah.
In the latest release, we did actually start, if you deploy anything that uses resource governance, we will start automatically, we'll automatically report
Right.
CPU cores and memory for the nodes in the cluster.
Are the capacities then defined on the nodes? 'Cause
Yep,
you
they automatically read the
read it.
available memory and cores from the
Yeah, there you
machine.
go.
They buffer it slightly, which is something that Mikkel asked me a brain teaser about the other day. This machine has 4 cores. Why does it only say 3? It's because we're shaving some off the top for disasters and upgrades and things like that. But anyway, if
But
you
those
deploy
are all-
anything,
Those are reserved capacities, it's not actual use.
right? Well, that's how resource governance works. So, but the whole point is that at least in SFX, you would immediately see cores for the whole cluster, cores per node, memory for the whole cluster, and memory per node that was reserved, that was sitting there. That again is not actually usage, right? So that's just, when you deployed this thing, you said it must consume 2 gigs of RAM, right? You wanted to reserve that. And so that's what we do. It's capped and it's reserved. So it's just sitting there. So you'd be able to see all that information. That's only going to tell you from Service Fabric's perspective, what we know is reserved, and then what the actual service is reporting if it's reported some other number. It will tell you how much we think is left in the cluster, but it's not going to tell you how much Windows is consuming. It's not going to tell you how much all the other processes on the machines are consuming. It's only going to tell you what Service Fabric knows about the workloads that it's placed on those machines and what we've queried out of the machines to see what the information about it, the WMI provider tells us. So you probably want both. You probably want some real telemetry coming out of kind of the diagnostic agents getting plugged into OMS or App Insights or something like that that's going to tell you kind of historically over time, the perf counters said, this was CPU usage, this was memory consumption, this was disk I/O. You want those things.
Physical topology,
Right.
which is we don't expose the physical topology.
Right.
We don't expose switches and networks.
Right.
And
We only
physical
know
machines.
what.
We know our topology,
Right.
which is the nodes, which is kind of
That's the
it's
other
a
thing.
software concept more than it is a
The node is
hardware
basically
concept.
just a process, right?
It's a
I mean,
process.
that's
Node
even
is
how we do
pretty much
yeah,
a
5
process.
nodes. on
So
one
the
machine.
other thing to be aware of is just another difference between the types of information that you're going to get out of Service Fabric and the type of stuff you're going to get out of a real diagnostics provider or something that really knows about the infrastructure is you're not going to get history out of Service Fabric.
Yeah.
The query APIs that we give you are only instantaneous. It is,
That's now.
what is my cluster capacity remaining now?
Yeah.
How many cores is this process allocated now? It won't tell you about last week. And so that's another reason kind of why you want both, right? You want the historical data so that you can query and see these changes over time. And you want maybe for, provisioning, figuring out remaining capacity, assigning limits, things like that, you want the other numbers that are instantaneous right now.
So, but deploying a piece of code as a Service Fabric service onto a cluster to pick these numbers up is also a thing you could do. You don't
Yeah.
have to use the SF client. Well,
Sure.
the SF client
Yeah.
doesn't provide those
And
metrics for you, but you can get
you
to
can
it.
keep a
ask.
history.
Yeah.
You can keep a history in a reliable dictionary.
Yeah.
So I've done that before. That's pretty easy to do. You query every 5 seconds. You dump it into a reliable collection, and there's your history. I mean, if we were to build such a thing, that's probably what we would do.
But if you want to tie usage back to your services, you of course need to monitor those specific processes that host your service for those scenarios.
Yeah, and if you're
Service
doing
Fabric
that,
can't give you that, right? It's-
right. And if you're doing that, this is where you have to consider the hosting, what we call a hosting activation model, which says when you activate a new service, when you kind of instantiate it, do you want it to get its own exclusive process, or do you want it to share a host process with other services that are running the same binaries, the same code, basically? And if you give it an exclusive process, then it's pretty easy to just say, all right, I'm a service, I'm going to look at my own process, and I can figure out all kinds of stuff about, I can get all kinds of perf counter information about what I'm using. If you're sharing those processes with other services, that means you literally have a bunch of .NET objects that represent services sharing your host process, and then it becomes really difficult to figure out what is this particular service instance using, because it's just a .NET object.
Right.
That's all it is, and it's hard to get that information out there. So.
Getting the CLR to tell you what this object graph rooted here's
Yeah.
consumption is
Yeah,
in
good
terms of
luck.
memory,
Good luck.
tough.
Or how much CPU it's using. Yeah, tough. That's a hard one. So exclusive process. It's a good choice.
Yep.
Regardless.
Makes attributing
Makes me happy.
consumption a lot easier.
Okay. This is a follow-up.
Yeah. So this one, Manny touches on some Docker stuff. So he wanted to keep complexity away from Docker. That one.
Okay.
You see that one?
Mhm.
Yeah. By trying to attach IDM nimble volumes, etc. VMD.
It's VMware.
Yeah.
Yeah. Drive
Okay.
primitives.
Okay. I've been looking for a way. Okay. So the question is.
While he's figuring that out, I'll answer Marcine's, which is non-volatile memory. We have some plans for it. Mainly, it's just times when we realize now that we have structures that we keep in memory and structures that we keep on disk because we need certain things to be persisted through like power outages or failures, and those don't have to be different anymore. And what can we do in terms of efficiency there? We're like, sometimes your state is kept in a tree structure in memory, sometimes it's kept in a log thing on disk. Those don't have to be different anymore. You can use one and get both. So things like that. What's also changing is we're looking into in the future supporting things like RDMA. That'll mainly just be for performance reasons and if the hardware is there. But yeah, NVRAM or non-volatile memory is going to have a bigger impact on some of the data structures and how the internals of things work. But I don't know that it's really a difference that's going to end up getting exposed too much in the programming models. We don't have any plans to do anything like that.
So the Quantium's question, let me answer this. I'm not exactly sure if this is what you're looking for. So, as mentioned earlier, one of the things we are working on is to manage this volume driver and or the actual files volume driver. So what that will let you do is for a particular container image, it will let you access a particular drive, and it will let you actually pass in the credentials so that you can actually access, and you're the only container image who can actually look at that. Now, if your session state is something on a per container image, that is possibly something you can use. So, not sure if I'm answering your question, but
I guess the point is whatever drive is available for your container on a given node can be used. If there is any requirements and complexity in terms of which container, if multiple containers are using the same drive, which container can read and write at any given time, it's all up to you. We don't have any mechanism to help you control that.
Yeah. Yeah, I think Andreas gets kind of the question well with the next thing, which is it's the equivalent of like a remote replicated file share, right? And then it's mounted as a drive. So it's like Azure storage drives or things like that. So sure, you can go ahead and use something like that. Again, it just goes back to you have to be aware of what happens if that remote connection is ever not available, if that remote storage thing is ever down or not accepting writes. What is the behavior that you get at the end? My standard line whenever I get asked about can we add in this remote storage thing and save money or persist things in a different place? Sure you can. But you're always multiplying fractions, right? And so if the availability of that remote storage thing is 99.9, and the availability of your service fabric service is 99.9, the availability of the combination is not 99.9, it's less.
Yeah, multiplying fractions.
Multiplying fractions.
Like when you and I put our heads together and think about something.
We are infinitely stupid.
We're making it worse.
Than just one of us.
Yep.
Yeah.
Right,
It's one of those exactly like that.
We took you down along with
Exactly.
But it's
like
mainly
that.
because of the latency. Right?
Yeah,
it's
well,
not like
yeah.
routing doesn't work.
It's availability. But anyway, it's that problem, right? So you have to plan in for what's going to happen if that network link breaks or is slow or whatever, and you have to take that into consideration when doing things like availability planning and capacity planning. So we don't mind. It doesn't make a big difference to how Service Fabric works, but just be aware that you're taking on that additional dependency. And that's the most of it. Public API, my own code, deploy to party cluster. Yeah, query the party clusters first and see if you can get the numbers that you come up with to match what shows up in SFX. That's a good starting question. Yeah.
This one?
Service Fabric versus K8.
Yeah, that's
it came up in didn't came up in one of these.
You had to go there.
Sure.
He said it was
What's
going to be
the-
controversial. How come it's not showing? What is the
I
future?
don't know why it's controversial.
It's not controversial.
No, it's not.
I'd say
From an Azure point of view, right?
they're both here to stay.
They're both here to stay, and from an Azure point of view, we want to provide different options based on what people are looking for. And Kubernetes has done great in the open space world, has a great community, and there's a lot of people who at this point are used to and are using Kubernetes APIs to run their containerized workflows. And we're on a path in Azure to provide a great managed service to do that in Azure. On the Service Fabric side, we also have a great project for doing container-based workload and also doing process-based workloads that you can go to. And we're also going down this path of giving you a managed offering for Service Fabric and be able to run that in Azure. We're still providing a hybrid solution for running those workloads in Azure on-prem and even Edge, I think we call it, for
IoT devices.
IoT devices, small-based workloads anywhere. And we're looking into how to give you an even better hybrid story of doing some integrated management with those clusters not running in Azure. So yes, they're both there to stay. There are, to a large degree, you can end up doing the same with both offerings. It mainly comes down to where do you find yourself comfortable working in the Kubernetes world, and those APIs and other things you do already, or Service Fabric, which is a different way of doing things.
I mean, and there's also differences that you get in terms of, what the platform supports. So like, Kubernetes has a, let's say, different development model than we do today.
Yeah, I mean, I talked quite a bit about this on Stack Overflow not too long ago. And I think what it mainly comes down to is with Kubernetes, you're a little bit lower on the stack. So there's a lot of infrastructure management that it can do for you, which is pretty cool. Especially if you want to abstract away some of the infrastructure of data centers or for cloud hosting providers that support it. Kubernetes gives you a lot of cool stuff so you can manage kind of infrastructure. There's a bit of overlap, of course, between Kubernetes and Service Fabric. We both manage containers, we both orchestrate things, we both kind of provide that layer of things. But Service Fabric, we tend to focus a bit more on application development specifically, rather than infrastructure management. So that's kind of where they're different, right? So if you're looking for, I really mainly just want to focus on applications, and I don't care too much about how the infrastructure looks. Service Fabric will tend to work a little better for you because we provide tools for that and try to make that a lot easier. And if your goal is really, I just want to manage the infrastructure and I don't want it to say anything about how I write my applications, I just want to give you containers, then Kubernetes is a good solution for that too. The other big difference too that is maybe more subtle is that Service Fabric too is really a data platform, so it's kind of a data aware platform. So like here's the difference, right? So in Kubernetes, you have to maintain, the system has to maintain some state about the cluster, and it uses etcd to do that, right? So it brings in something to kind of to hold state and make it self-contained. Service Fabric has the same problem. We have to maintain the state of the cluster as well. But rather than bringing in some replicated data store to do that, we are the replicated data store that does that. So we actually provide that layer too. So Kubernetes will let you take something like etcd or Zookeeper and run it on there in a distributed way. Service Fabric lets you build those things yourselves with an application layer on top. So there are differences.
Yeah. The programming model, the self-sustained nature.
Right.
We do a lot of things and have done for a while around upgrades. So like you can upgrade Service Fabric in place, and that's a rolling thing. And there's lots of docs and maybe too many options about how to control those rollouts and what happens if they fail and roll back and all that type of stuff. That's kind of a big difference. The programming model part is a big difference. The statefulness is a big difference.
I'd say if we were purely just about orchestrating containers, then I don't know what we'd be doing here. I mean, that's like asking if you use Kubernetes or Docker Swarm, right? I mean, is it too soon for that? But yeah, there's an application layer to ours that you generally don't get.
There also is a point in, it might be more of a point in time thing, but Service Fabric has been around for Windows for many years, and recently got onto Linux with G8 on Linux, where Kubernetes is to a large degree the other way around.
Yeah.
And there is, with all these things, things take time to mature.
Yep.
So I would say if you are doing .NET and have done .NET for a long time, you would probably find yourself more
at home
in the Service Fabric Windows-based world. Whereas if you're never seen Visual Studio, you have a Mac, there's probably other places where you would feel more.
Yeah,
and we're working on getting there. I mean, we've already GA'd.
We do want to expand that.
We are GA'd on both Linux and Windows, so that's a difference. Whereas most of the Kubernetes stuff is just showing up on Windows and has been on Linux for a while. We're GA'd on both. To Miguel's point, it's fair to say we're less robust and we're less well known in the Linux world, certainly.
Yeah.
The community sizes are different. That's a thing. The way the docs are done is different. There's all sorts of things about the style that feel different, that might put you more at home, one or the other. But I don't think it's any. I'm not going to consider this going out on a limb. I think Service Fabric is a more robust, more fully fleshed out platform that handles more aspects of the total problem of shipping a application at scale than something like Kubernetes.
Yeah, I mean, like Merson says here, Kubernetes has no fault detection. So here's the interesting thing. So since Service Fabric is again, as a data platform, since we actually run databases
On this thing.
on this thing. So we have to be able to do interesting things. Like, for example, we are constantly monitoring disk activity to make sure that the disks aren't failing underneath. And if we detect any kind of abnormalities in disk operations, we'll proactively start moving data off, right? So we can do that because we are the data platform. If we were just hosting something like etcd, maybe we don't care or didn't think about that. So we have a lot of ties in down to the underlying.
Yeah, I mean, and there's a lot of fiddly specifics around stateful services and things like that don't exist yet.
Great.
So and another thing, and there's a piece of advice you could take as well, is what we've seen, and even what we've done with a lot of our Microsoft colleagues who are in the field and also dealing with customers asking these kind of questions is. I mean, if you have a dev team who needs to make a decision, go do like small hacks, like spend a day or two on each of the platform and figure out where you will feel at home. I mean, get your hands dirty and go and experience this yourself. Besides doing the actual feature comparison and what you're looking for.
Yeah, I think
That's a good way to approach it.
Yeah, I think we missed a question for Andreas. Wanted something clarified. I mean, in terms of container support storage, Service Fabric has no idea where those drives are. So from our perspective, we're looking at C drive, D drive, E drive, whatever you've configured us to store, whatever information you have. So we don't even know if that's a physical local attached drive, if it's a remote network provided thing, if it's a clustered file system, if it's a blob back storage in a drive in Azure. We don't know. So I don't know specifically if we've tried those particular drive implementations or those storage mechanisms, but there's nothing special about how Service Fabric interacts with drives. So again, you get, this is what I go back to, is saying, just be aware of the performance characteristics, the reliability characteristics, and what impact that's going to have on your actual workloads if the latency spikes, the network gets jittery, the remote thing has a maintenance window, anything like that. Those are the things that will end up impacting the cluster, and they will impact them just like anything else that was trying to write to the drives at that time. So awareness, right? But
yeah.
we don't have any special considerations.
So the thing that I just pasted in is one of our Azure CAT colleagues.
Yes.
Actually just frequently runs
former
these,
Service Fabric guy.
performance analytics in Azure, and you can see some of the latency differences between blob storage and things like Service Fabric dictionaries and other services we have in Azure. So So look at those for inspiration as well.
Kubernetes. Kubernetes is dead.
Yeah, Uber. No, it was. Kubernetes is dead, and Marcine's point was also, yes, a fair thing we should point out is that Service Fabric has supported geographically spanned or multi-region clusters since V1, which was 5-7 years ago. That functionality in Kubernetes is still very raw. It was recently moved out of the Kubernetes project kind of mainline and put into its own repo. And there's still a lot of debate in that community about how to provide that functionality. If you needed that, Service Fabric is a pretty good bet today. Linux or Windows, we can help you set that up. It's never easy to set it up because it depends a lot on how the network is provisioned. But it is something that Service Fabric supports, and that's how we've run some very large workloads inside of Microsoft for some time now. So it's not a configuration that scares us in any way, really. The only other thing, while we're jumping from topic to topic and driving everybody nuts,
Okay.
On the performance numbers that Jesse posts, one thing to be careful of when looking at them is that some of the other services that he talks about don't have quite the same reliability and consistency guarantees that Service Fabric does. So specifically, if you're comparing, say, the reliable collections to, let's pick on Redis, which is one of the ones that we have in there. Redis doesn't, or at least his test didn't use the fully consistent, persisted, replicated Quorum Act configuration for Redis. It just used whatever the default was from Azure Redis. That's also
the
different.
other link.
Yeah,
we have one ourselves. It's fairly old.
Yeah.
Since we ran it, but here you go.
So with all these things, I would just be aware that, make sure that you're doing your best to compare apples to apples in terms of persistence, whether or not that data is getting written to an actual drive or just kept in memory, and consistency in terms of quorum acts, when the write is considered complete, stuff like that. Yeah, and as a funny story from we've been at this for a while, when Mongo was new, and the Earth had just been birthed from the void.
I heard it's web scale.
Yeah, well,
That's
they were.
that YouTube.
Yeah, so Mongo was getting fantastic write speeds, and upon inspecting their code, because they were open source, it was determined that they were informing the client that the write was successful before it left the box. So it was sitting still in your process on locally,
So
and
basically as fast as I can run a loop.
as fast as you could while through, it was hacking things. They fixed that, right? But at the time, we were seeing these insane numbers, and nobody could figure out how they were so performant. We were looking at hardware, and eventually we had to look at the code, and we saw, oh, it's not going off the machine. So when you're doing these comparisons, just be careful. And if you do see a real discrepancy, right, where you're wondering what performance can I reasonably get from Service Fabric, I would go to the perf test repo that Mikkel set out the link for there.
The last one.
Not the YouTube link, the one before, because what that has is some pretty good, those tests will give you a good min bar for the type of performance you can expect to see. They're not wholly optimized. They use the remoting stack instead of HTTP. They're not necessarily going to reflect what your data looks like.
They use data contract
They use
serializers.
data contract serializers. So there's all sorts of things in there that that are not going to represent probably your production workload. So just when you're looking at these types of comparisons, just try and get it as close to apples and apples as possible. And let us know if you see anything wholly out of expectation.
All right, now we have a shortened lightning round.
Okay.
I think we only have a
So-
couple that we need to
Yeah.
resolve.
You posted a survey link. We really appreciate your feedback on doing these Q&As.
Yeah, they're already hit.
Please comment that this is the Timezone edition.
Yeah.
There was a JVM question.
Yep. Do you have plans to support running JVM services and Service Fabric on both Windows and Linux?
Yeah, so the answer is absolutely yes. Just today, our Java APIs are only certified to work on Linux. They are not GA'd or even in preview yet on Windows. It shouldn't make a difference because that's the whole point of Java, right? Write once, run anywhere. Remember that nice one? But turns out that's harder than it sounds, and you might find differences. But yeah, we fully expect that these will align where both will be supported in multiple places.
Okay, so how big is the Service Fabric engineering team? Are you growing? Yes, we're hiring.
Yeah, if you know
I
anybody who's really
don't know
young-
if that was a question, but
We are growing. We're definitely growing.
We are certainly growing.
The size, it's pretty big at this point.
It's pretty big, but it's also not as big as I want it to be.
Yeah. It
closing
should be
in
bigger.
100?
Maybe close.
Almost.
Yeah, about 100.
About
I think we're safe to say. I'm sure that's some trade secret we're not supposed to share.
Based
On this, you can guess the size of Microsoft. Yeah, whatever. So yeah, we're around 100 and we're growing pretty constantly.
And we're high.
Yeah, we run again. Reminder: we run about a third of the cores on Azure, with a team of about 100. So that's if you're wondering why. I mean,
We wrote the software.
the incident. Yeah, we wrote the software. We don't need to do it. Thank you.
Easy.
Yeah.
Are you responding to Andres?
Oh,
Mikkel?
Data Explorer backup. So Data Explorer, yes, there was,
That's
again,
it.
Jesse did a thing with the OData exposure, the ASP.NET Core middleware thing that exposed an OData endpoint for you to be able to explore your reliable collections.
Mm-hmm.
And he also showed an integration into Service Fabric Explorer. The OData NuGet library is out there, which basically exposes the endpoint. The Service Fabric Explorer integration we haven't fully done yet because we basically need to revision the work that we showed in a demo at some point in time. But yes, we will do it. Actually, the Service Fabric Explorer is now open sourced, and we welcome any contribution.
Yes.
And yes, we're still hiring.
Okay, so we're
And
Backup and restore.
Backup Restore is still in preview. I hope it will be out in 6.2. It might not GA until 6.3 because there were some concerns around it only supporting unsecure clusters initially, and it turns out there's a little more work to do to make that in parity on Windows and Linux and .NET Core and .NET Standard and a few other things.
This is the service you're talking about,
Yeah.
backup restore service.
Yeah, the backup and restore capabilities have always existed.
So, swag handout, best questions. I have 4 nominations. I have more t-shirts. So, Nick, you're going to get a t-shirt for taking it down the memory discussion thing.
That's good.
Quantium, you took us onto Linux architecture, networking, storage, on-prem.
Okay.
Nice little venture there. Andre, you wanted to crash the party clusters. You got the crash. the party
I actually
cluster
like
thing.
this service fabric.
And
versus
of
Kubernetes
course,
better.
Marcin, you're getting one for always asking at least one question. And since we didn't have, just, send me an email, and let's get in contact. I'll figure out how to get those to you.
Actually,
We didn't
like
have a
that.
lot of people on this call, so if you just want a t-shirt, send me an email as well. We'll figure it out.
Oh, that makes it. You get a card. Everybody gets a card.
You get a t-shirt. You get a t-shirt.
If I don't have a
Everybody gets a
t-shirt, I'll
t-shirt.
find some other swag and we can take
Because
that
I like
as well.
Sean's question on TLS too. So.
Actually, that was a good one.
Yeah, cool. Make sure to send us an email while we'll get
You
you
guys always have good questions, so it's hard to pick.
Yeah, file sizes? Yeah.
I haven't had to
okay.
remember how server GC worked in a while, so
Yeah, that's a good one.
Cool.
Okay. All right. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks,
again.
guys.
And have
See
a
you.
good day in Australia.
And we'll see you next time. Yeah.
Yes. Cheers.